Hi. Thanks, everybody, for attending today. Today we're going to be doing a 1-hour webinar around the new paradigm in database technology, focusing on Oracle Database Appliance and the TCO benefits, as well as a free TCO offering that PTI is offering prospects. Today we have myself, who's the Vice President of Business Development at Predictive Technologies, as well as Lindsay Pickle, who's the Oracle Director of Worldwide Alliances and a Oracle Database Appliance Specialist. So to highlight what was noted earlier, we highly encourage people to ask questions during this event so that we can have a strong interactive process here. Today's agenda is as follows. We're going to do a brief overview of Predictive Technologies as a company. We're then going to hand it to Lindsay, and he's going to talk about Oracle Database Appliance overview. Then I'm going to talk about a section about TCO benefits, and as well as a call to action for a free TCO report from Predictive Technologies. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A for the questions that have been asked during chat in the session. So Predictive Technologies, we are an Oracle Gold partner since 2001. We're based in Rancho Santa Margarita, which is South Orange County in Southern California. We have customers across the entire country, from East Coast to the Midwest, all the way to Northern and Southern California. We are an Oracle specialized partner. What does that mean? That means we train, test, and deploy specific solutions and are graded out by Oracle on those categories. Those specializations include database, rack, performance tuning, middleware, Golden Gate, Oracle VM, Oracle Linux, as well as engineered systems like ODA that we're talking about today. We do 3 primary lines of business: professional services for technology enablement. Sample examples of this are database deployments, upgrades, migrations, health checks, WebLogic, Golden Gate, as well as other engineered systems project-by-project work. We also provide managed services for customer. We have a full help desk ticketing ITIL compliant platform to support customers of all shapes and size, whether they're a customer with 1 DBA or 4 DBAs or 1 Unix admin or no Unix admin. We can provide a full SLA support and operational management for support of that process. The last thing we do is we're an Oracle technology licensing and hardware solution provider. So if you're struggling to understand how your licensing is done, or you're trying to get kind of that shades of gray within Oracle licensing, we can help you out with those things. And lastly, we're a hardware solution provider like engineered systems that we're talking about today. Here's a list of some of our references. Some are small, some are big. At the end of the day, we try to fit a glove fit approach for your specific needs as a customer. So I'm now going to transition this to Lindsay and hand it to him.
Thanks, Brian. As Brian mentioned, my name is Lindsay Pickle. I'm the Director for Database Technologies for Oracle's Worldwide Alliances and Channels organization. And specifically what I do is I focus on our database technologies, but I also manage our specialization program, which is what certifies partners in our database technologies, such as the Database Appliance, Real Application Clusters, and the other ones that Brian was mentioning that Predictive Technologies has their credentialing in. So that's a little bit about me. Now let's kind of move over to the Oracle Database Appliance. What is the Database Appliance? What are the goals of the Database Appliance, and how can it really help you as an end customer and benefit you in your organization? Before the Database Appliance was around, we kind of step back. And a lot of people look back, and years ago, people would build their own PCs. It was a hobby. It was something fun to do. But ultimately, it was because the individual components you could purchase at a lower price and build a superior machine. And now we've gotten to the point where the cost of components and manufacturing them is a sort that it's more of a hobby where it's not as cost-effective to do so. So we look at the Database Appliance and we apply it to a business standpoint, and we look at what it takes. Traditionally, if someone wanted to build a highly available environment or a highly reliable environment, and they wanted to build it with on cluster technology, what they would do is they would go through a deployment cycle and an acquisition phase. You would talk with your storage vendors and acquire storage. You talk to your computing vendors and acquire CPU. You would decide how many CPUs to put in, how much memory, go through all these things, talk with your networking supplier, get networking, and then maybe you're a small shop and you have one or two folks that kind of put it all together, or maybe you have a larger organization and you have multiple organizations all putting this together and get it up and running. Well, traditional deployment of a database in a highly available environment was considered successful and on time if done within 60 to 90 days. So within that time frame, in 60 to 90 days, you finally get to a point where you have a cluster available for the installation of database software. And now what you can do is actually start your work at hand and start deploying your application or developing your application and moving from that. So a 3-month time window, roughly. With the database appliance, Oracle has already brought in the configuration, the database, the hardware, the storage, the networking, all integrated into one environment where when it ships to you, within 6 hours of taking it off your dock and plugging it in, you can be up and running with a database open, ready to install your application or ready to move forward. So we've moved from 60 to 90-day window to 6 hours. So that's really the story behind the database appliance. So let's dive into a little more detail. There are 3 main goals with the database. It's simple. It needs to be very easy to get up and running and deploy in your environment. It needs to be very reliable. And it needs to be affordable and meet your business needs. These are the 3 main design goals with the database appliance that we're going to take a look into as we go forward today. The Oracle Database Appliance is built on Oracle's 11G Release 2 database. It's the #1 database in market share, in data warehousing, and enterprise applications. So you're not deploying proprietary software or something that's different from your environment you already have. You will be able to operate this and run this within your existing business practices, with your existing IT shops, and we've even provided some additional tools that we'll talk about within the database appliance to simplify and manage the environment itself, making it available to be deployed in multiple remote scenarios as well. So what all is kind of the database appliance? Let's take a look at our first goal. The first goal in the database appliance, as I mentioned in the story earlier, is to really reduce the time to market. How long does it take? Time to deploy. From the time you decide that you need to deploy a new database or upgrade your existing hardware because you've had it in production for 3 years and you need more capacity. What processes do you go through? How can we do this in as short a time possible? So now you no longer have to go through and assemble all the components, get everything together. It comes to you prepackaged, shipped, all integrated together, all the networking ready to go, and the entire system is ready. The other thing with this is, that's great. That's a one-time deployment. We've gotten through that. We've gotten past it. How can it really simplify your management within your shop once you move to deployment? Oracle has deployed, with the database appliance, a special database appliance management console for patch management. The thing that is very nice about this is now you have an environment that when you go to patch, the patch management from the database appliance management console will come through and it deploys the Oracle database patches, it deploys the operating system patches, and any firmware updates that need to happen. So you're going to have an environment that's identical to the one that's sitting in Oracle development. So if there's something that's detected, the patches can be automated. You go through, click to deploy the patch. Now these aren't pushed patches. You do have to go and pull the patch yourself through the console. But you get the patch, it deploys it to the system, and updates it. This gives you an environment where if you have multiple boxes, so you have a test dev, you have a QA, you have a production, you can be guaranteed that each and every one of these machines are exactly identical. So what's in the database appliance? Everything in the database appliance is available to order as individual components if you wanted to build it yourself. Except what you don't get is the pre-engineered system where it's already been optimized and put together if you were to do this. You also would now move from that 6-hour window to that 60 to 90-day time frame. So when we look at the components, what is the database appliance? It's actually 2 servers that each have 2 sockets with 6 cores apiece, giving you a computing capacity of 24 processor cores. What is very unique to the database appliance is that you don't have to run all of the cores. You don't need to turn on except the ones you want to use. When you actually install, it will ask you how many cores do you want to run. And you can choose an even numbers from 2 to 24 in pairs. Choose those number of CPUs, and Oracle will literally just power on the cores you choose to run, also lowering your operating costs to the box because it's not using the additional CPU capacity. It comes with 192 gigs of RAM, fully redundant clustering internally built into it. We ship 2 types of storage. Traditional storage, which has 4 terabytes usable. We've already mirrored this. We've already gone ahead and taken care of the HA capability in it. We've already optimized it for that. So your data will fit within 4 terabytes. If you need more space, you can leverage the compression option, or you can attach NFS storage. We also include solid-state drives for added performance. These have already been optimized so that the highly written redo log files and such are written to those. Again, Oracle has gone in and taken the time to tune and deploy all of the software to its built to the most optimized manner. So you get everything included. You just stick it in your rack and plug it in. From a software standpoint, we wanted to talk about a little bit of what's in there. Everything, like we talked about the hardware, is hardware that has been around. It's nothing, brand new or earth-shattering. But we also wanted to take within the software, we want to take our existing proven software, the Oracle Enterprise Edition database, and add this on top of the hardware and pre-optimize everything. If you look within the software, we're including such as Oracle's grid management solution. Currently, it does ship with 11G Release 2. You do have the option of upgrading that to our 12C management platform as well. We handle all the storage is handled within the application management software. So your storage is already there. It's already optimized for you when it comes out. The clusterware is there, and the operating system. You don't have to go in when you get the environment and start messing with operating system parameters. As a matter of fact, when you install it, it gives you a choice of 8 different configurations of the database in size. And when you choose those, it actually uses pre-optimized settings that Oracle's developed specifically to this hardware and specifically to this platform. So you'll have a fully optimized system at deployment. The other thing that Oracle does is when we ship the software, the actual database appliance does need to have a network connection, because we'll actually go out to Oracle servers and download the latest release of all the software. So when you deploy, if there was a patch that has occurred in the time since the hardware was shipped or actually in a build stage, all those patches are applied and you're up to date at the very, very beginning. A lot of benefit with that. Reduce risk. We talked a lot about the automation in there. We talked about a lot about different components. One of the biggest things that we've seen, and I've seen over my 15 years at Oracle, is when we're looking at software, there's so many different configurations that most people don't have the exact same hardware as somewhere else. So they have a different storage platform on different computing hardware. They have different networking components. They have different network cards inserted within the hardware, making this a very, multitudes of different configurations, which provides challenges for support because Oracle doesn't have a system exactly like yours before. Now with Oracle's engineered systems, you're guaranteed that our development has an identical system to yours, and so does our support organization, where we can see exactly what's going on. Since we've pre-optimized this, you reduce your setup and installation risk of errors. What happens in the past, as I know many people have seen, is you've gone out and you have a test dev or a QA environment, and you're running everything there, and everything runs production, is running perfect. And then you've gone through your quality tests, and you go, it's time to roll to production. And you roll to production, and everything works well for a day or two. and then all of a sudden you have production problems. And people start going back, and sometimes it's not the exact same hardware in test dev as it is in production. It could be a smaller version. It could be a scaled down version. It could be, you know, a little bit older hardware. So everything's not exactly the same. Or there were windows when items were patched, and QA and test was able to be patched during the window, you know, when firmware was upgraded, but for some reason production wasn't. Or not every node across the system was done. We see a lot of, have traditionally seen errors when people are going through it and configuring the database. They just simply miss a step. Done it a bunch of times, easily skipped one. This removes all of that from the implementation, reducing the chance of downtime in the future by removing all those steps where errors can occur. The patch, the updates, and the test are all automated. You go through, you go to the management console, you choose to update the software, it downloads the latest patches, applies and brings everything up to the latest release, and brings all the firmware up to date and the operating system. And in addition to it, you have the option of running Oracle's real application clusters, which brings high availability, allowing your database to run across both nodes and fully utilize the full capacity of the entire box. That way, if there is a hardware fault failure within there, everything's redundant, your database is still up and running, and then you just work on replacing the hardware component. Kind of what the database appliance looks like from the back when it comes to you. It is very easy to deploy. It's literally 3 steps. You plug it in to your rack, connect the cables, use a standard power, 120, connect your power up, you plug it into your network. There is actually a great network wizard that is in the wizard for the install, so it'll tell you all the IP addresses you need. You can just enter your starting IP address. It'll give you the full range for all the ones you'll need to put into your DNS servers internally. And then you go through the wizard. The biggest time is actually downloading the software. It'll download the software, install it, configure it. Once you've gone through the 9 screens choosing your different configuration options, it'll save everything to a file. So if you have multiple deployments, you can just deploy that file at different locations and roll everything out. And once you've completed the wizard, it's really just leave it alone and wait till it comes up. So some of the things that are within the database appliance that really make it easy to manage. So the database appliance is also goal is to reduce the management time within the environment itself. As I've mentioned, we've pre-optimized the software on top of the hardware platform. So we've put in some self-managing features that are actually already pre-configured. The storage. When you get your database, you don't have to figure out how to lay out your disk. You don't have to figure out where to put your data files. You don't have to go through and figure out what's the best place to put, you know, redo log files and archive files. All of those things have been pre-optimized and laid out for you. The memory configuration. How do you allocate memory? When you choose from the 8 different types of database sizes you choose from, each has an optimized memory layout and configuration and storage layout. And you go through and you choose those, and off you go, and you have a fully automated system. We do have automatic detection of many failures from a hardware standpoint. We also offer them from a software. They can be alerted. The database appliance is a great thing for, it can either bring it to the console, or if you're not managing the database appliance yourself, say you've contracted out your systems management, it can alert a remote console, so a remote DBA service can come in and manage it without actually being connected to the area. So it's quite optimized for that as well. The other thing that is built in is phone home. The hardware capability has the capability to phone Oracle and automatically open up a service request for hardware fault failures. Now, this isn't for software. It is specifically for the hardware component. But if you have a disk that fails, it will open up a service request, put in the request for the new disk. Oracle will ship your disk. You'll get it, and it's hot pluggable. You remove the failed disk, plug it back in, the new one in. The storage management software automatically rebalances the database while that disk is at fault, so you don't have errors while you're down or production issues. And when the new disk is reintroduced back into the system and it's been fixed, it rebalances the entire storage to optimize it for the new disk being involved. And again, it's one button patching for everything. So it's very, very easy. And if you've ever called Oracle support, they ask you for log files, the management console actually has a nice little area that'll collect all those log files and package them up so you can send them directly to Oracle for support. And I think the most important thing within an enterprise is a single point of contact. You no longer have to reach out to an operating system vendor, a hardware vendor, a database vendor to try and figure out what's wrong with your environment while all three of them aren't communicating. Now you have one person you call who handles the entire situation and supports everything within your environment. So it makes it much, much easier to manage. The Appliance Manager software itself, this is kind of a quick look at the, if you look on the right-hand side, is the actual install wizard. We can't scroll all the way down on that, but there's actually about 6 or 7 steps, and you just literally click next through. Your most challenging thing will be coming up with a machine name. But one thing that's done is it's self-managing. It does leverage all of the diagnostic capabilities within the database itself, brings those to the user's attention. It gives you one console to manage the entire environment. So you don't have to break out and go and do something for the operating system. You don't have to go somewhere else for hardware. You don't have to go somewhere else for database. It's just one stop, and you're there to leverage everything. We talked a little bit about deployment, if you look at the time, but also if you look at the management and how the environment scales. Within a traditional database environment with multiple management in different areas, you have lots of people touching it, from the time you're implementing it to the time you're managing it, from system administrators, storage administrators, network, and then ultimately expertise for optimization and installation. All this is compressed down and done in the Appliance Manager. This includes Oracle's years and years of knowledge of how to optimize a database technology. Since we know exactly what the hardware is, we know exactly what the configuration is, we know exactly the size of the disk, the speed of the disk, we have pre-optimized your configuration for that hardware. You just boot the system up, and you're completely optimized and ready to go, including the installation expertise, dramatically reducing the amount of time that it takes to deploy as well as manage and implement. A third-party study was recently conducted, and over 3 years, the man-hour savings is over 2,000 hours over a 3-year time period. So that is actually a full person's headcount for an entire year is now able to be used so they can manage and be more productive on their systems instead of just monitoring and maintaining, make sure it's up and running. Now they can take time and manage and either evaluate multiple systems or make sure that they're having more productive time getting new environments online and working in proactive tasks. And then finally, the third goal is to align to the business demand. There are a lot of environments that are out there when people go in and they deploy it, they don't need all the capacity that's there. You only need 2 cores or 4 cores, or for instance, you're running a standard edition of the database because you wanted to run on a small environment, but you really wanted to take advantage of the multiple CPU characteristics of the enterprise database to get better performance, but you just don't need all that overhead. So the database appliance allows you to turn on the cores you need. So as you grow, you can start small, and if you need to add more capacity, you can dynamically turn on additional cores across the database appliance. Very easy to turn them in. Obviously, this is done with the Appliance Manager. It gets them up and running and makes it much, much faster. So, and this also improves, I mentioned earlier, with the 2,000 hour savings, allows your DBAs to be more productive and work across more environments. So with the Database Appliance, there are not multiple hardware configurations. There's one to choose from. It comes fully populated with all your storage, all your memory, and all 24 cores. You choose how many cores to turn on. As you decide you need additional capacity, you turn on the additional cores. You don't have to take your hardware offline to do this. You don't have to take downtime. You're not waiting on a board to be shipped to you with additional CPUs. You don't have to plug it in. There's no hardware. That's how you handle it. It also allows you to be very flexible, as Brian mentioned, helping you with your licensing, very flexible with your licensing. So if you are using existing licenses and you want to deploy to the database appliance, but you don't want to add multiple more licenses because you already have some they're using, you're just transitioning, you can move them over to the database appliance as well. So it's a very, very flexible model that allows you to kind of pay as you grow. As you start off small, this allows you to take small environments that you see and say, all right, in the next year or so this is going to grow, but I don't want to have a huge capital outlay up front. Let's go ahead and deploy it to the appliance, turn on to 4 cores, and as we see the environment grow or we need additional capacity, we will turn those cores on as we see the time fits. And you can model your Oracle licensing to that as well. So if we look at it, it's a very low entry price. It's pre-integrated, one-button configuration compared to our competitors. It does come with 24 cores. You have a single support contract, and you can license as little as 2 cores within the environment, making it very, very flexible. So what is the database appliance? It's extremely simple. One-button implementation, one-button patching. It's a cost-effective method. It's a pay-as-you-go licensing. You don't have to license the entire hardware. You just turn on the CPUs you want to, or cores you wish to use, and license them accordingly. And it's complete and integrated. It has the hardware and the software already developed within itself, and all of it optimized for that environment. So where do we see the database appliance being used? We see it in a lot of different applications, from small businesses to enterprise. We see it in distributed environments being leveraged, such as retail, where they need to put databases within point of sale, where they don't have DBAs, where everything is managed remotely, and where patching is done, with single patch updates. We see it leveraged consistently on on hardware upgrades. We really see the database appliance being deployed a lot as people are going through the upgrade cycle. If you're currently on an x86 platform, the biggest difference you're going to get with going with Oracle over the competitor is that you have everything optimized, your deployment time is less, and your cost of operations over time. Other than that, you'll be leveraging your x86 platform, the new x86 platform, and you'll be able to take existing advantage of all the knowledge you have in your shop already. So it's very, very widely adopted within upgrading servers. We also see a lot of customers who've traditionally been standard edition databases because they only need to run 2 cores. They only need to run 4 cores. So they've bought the standard edition, but they've seen the environment needs to be, they need to take advantage of those multiple CPUs that are in there, because the standard edition, one thing it does is, it has 4 cores. That means you can run 4 tasks at a time. When you move to the enterprise edition, it allows multiple tasks to be run at the same time, as well as provides a lot of options for managing the system online. Where standard edition is more of a departmental, it's meant from a 9 to 5 operations with a standard downtime for maintenance. Enterprise edition doesn't require maintenance. Windows is the same as standard does. So they see, gosh, we need to move to an environment where we can have uptime when we need it. So they can move to enterprise edition, lowering that cost as well. New application deployment, and then migrations and consolidations of databases, where with you're upgrading your hardware. A lot of people are on the 10G release 2, and they have older hardware looking to come in, deploy a new hardware platform, and upgrade the database to the 11GR2 at the same time. So those are some of the key times we're seeing that. There are a lot more places to use it and deploy. Those are just a few examples. So I guess, Brian, turn it over to you.
All right. So this is Brian Boyd from Predictive Technologies. I'm going to talk about the TCO benefits of ODA from a low-risk, low-cost, low-maintenance, and on-demand licensing perspective. So database, appliance, or the puzzle pieces. You basically, with ODA, have an option to buy a pre-engineered system or build it like you traditionally would have. Acquiring the server, storage, OS patch, database patch, and then validate it works, and then begin a migration and application testing process. primarily 80 to 90% of those steps are eliminated with the Oracle Database Appliance. Again, it just enables you to do more with less and do it a lot faster. So imagine what a DBA could do with 2,000 hours of extra time over 3 years. So ORC International did some studies, and this was kind of summarized by what Lindsay mentioned, but effectively in the first year there's an 800 hours savings, and in the subsequent next 2 years, 600 plus hours of extra DBA time that you can go do tactical and strategic things. Again, a lot of the installation, deployment, maintenance, support, and scaling is addressed by this, and it allows you to focus on more strategic tasks. So here are some of those things that DBAs have to do. Again, tasks that DBAs want to do more time with, what keeps them up at night, and the top 3 challenges for DBAs. Just imagine if you had that 800 hours in year 1, 600 in the next, and 600 in the next. They can spend more time with some of these things versus some of those other operational things that are typically handled in a build-your-own type of a solution. So again, just to summarize that, again, you're able to do more with less. You can manage more systems with the same amount of resources. And from a DBA perspective, you become more strategic because you're really more involved with strategy and design things versus some of that baseline operational management. So I'm highlighting in this slide very similar to what Lindsay indicated earlier. With the pay-as-you-grow database licensing in ODA, you have a lot more flexibility. That whole sizing perspective of, hey, you're guessing when you're buying hardware as to what you're going to need over a 3-year period from a CPU utilization, you don't really need to go through that with ODA. You can start small, whether it's a standard to an enterprise or whether you need a certain number of cores based on your deployment, and then you can scale up as you need to. And that way you're not overbuying, and you're buying for what you need within your window. So again, I just want to emphasize on this point is you really have a ton of flexibility as you go through this, and you can start small and then grow up. So we're going to do a 8-core TCO comparison here in the next slide, again comparing a buy versus build scenario. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but we try to really put comparable numbers in here that make sense to everybody. So if you look at this slide, again, you can add up the savings on a buy versus build scenario. In column 1, you've got the Oracle Database Appliance highlighted in red. The second and the third column, you have building your own system. Every customer is going to have a unique, different characterization and scenario that they're looking at. But the point is that if you go all the way to the right-hand column and you compare the savings from a setup, maintenance, patching, support, all those type of things, you effectively show a huge savings in productivity and time so that you can do more with less. The other part of this, and Lindsay echoed this earlier, which we feel is probably the most important thing, is the level of difficulty, or we'll translate that into risk. With ODA, there's a tiny amount of risk when you deploy it, whereas when you engineer systems, there's a huge amount of risk. Any DBA or any Unix admin, any network person knows things don't always go according to plan when you get new gear and equipment and whatnot and try to engineer that system. That causes delays in projects and whatnot. With ODA, if it aligns with your business goals from a Intel, Linux perspective, very much will reduce your risk factors. So this is just kind of summing up that last slide. Over 2,000 hours of savings in DBA time over a 3-year period, $200K in OpEx savings, and again, you can reduce your licensing materially with ODA because you're buying what you need versus overbuying. So time savings detail, we're just going to talk about kind of more granular about the benefits here of doing more with less with your DBA activities. So again, just kind of bullet pointing these things from an installation and deployment standpoint. As long as you're within the framework of ODA, there's no sizing requirement. Very straightforward, not a lot of variables. There's not a lot of research needed. You're able to deploy it in hours. No testing and interoperability issues. All huge benefits if you're trying to do more with less and do it faster. This particular chart on the right side talks about hours or minutes with ODA versus a traditional SQL Server deployment. Again, there's always going to be differences in variables in each unique situation. But again, even if you cut it by 25 or 30% on one side of it, there's a huge amount of savings in time and effort overall for initial and deployment. Maintenance. So again, echoing a few thoughts that Lindsay had mentioned, you can do automated monthly patching in just under 2 hours. Patch testing is eliminated and it's a click-through. And again, this is one we run across. We've done a ton of Oracle rack deployments with many, many, many different configurations. With ODA, it's one configuration. Everything is validated. Everything works. There are no variables, and that enables, from a maintenance standpoint, to be a huge savings in time. And again, we do this comparison on the right side on the maintenance task. 20 hours versus nearly 600 hours over a year period is just a dramatic amount of difference. Support. So again, highlighting what Lindsay had mentioned, you quickly analyze the entire environment. You don't have to communicate with 6 different vendors if there's a problem. You don't need to decide what to send. The log files are automatically sent. Just the risk for errors is dramatically reduced. Not quite as much savings in this area, but still a material amount versus a different database deployment. So we're getting into the section where we've had a huge amount of success here with customers. At PTI, we offer a free TCO study for prospects. In the call to action period, we'll talk about this in greater detail. But the point is, we'll build a TCO study for your unique situation so that you have something that you can hand to executive management and say, hey, this is why we want to do this in 6 days versus 2 months, time the market and all the other considerations into it. So this is a reference slide from a customer who went through our TCO study process. PTI was invaluable in our process, procuring for us upgrade and migration licensing, financing, and delivery commitments for a new system, as well as all the business data we needed to make this decision. Stuart Newton, VP of Technology of One Great Family. Effectively, we went through a 1-hour process with them, 3 or 4 iterative, 10, 15-minute calls, gathering inputs, putting together the documents, and we'll show you some of those screenshot examples. He was able to walk into his board of directors and get approval for a project that had kind of been kicking around on the side for the last 2 years. So again, this works. It's empirical evidence, it's factual, and it's validated by the customer, and it allows you to position projects to move forward faster. So in our TCO studies, we do a few different things. One is we show people project plans. So here's an example of a pre-engineered system project plan, again, from the planning, provisioning, and deployment. Again, some of that's pre, some of it's post. It's 12 hours in and out. That's real short. This is real, and this is real facts that, showing this to a CIO or CTO or COO, it means something to them because they understand these things. So this is the contrast to this, a project plan comparison on building your own system. We used a little more aggressive numbers because we've done it so many times versus some of the Oracle studies. But again, you're talking 140 plus hours, lots of moving parts. Someone's busy with something else, something gets delayed for 2 days before that next person does it. Again, it's a clear comparison around that. So these are some sample outputs on various different customers that we've gone through. In this particular situation, we're comparing time. The customer wanted to build 3 rack high availability systems. We compared that with 3 ODA deployments. We summed up all the time and effort, risk levels, duration, And again, in this particular case, there was an 87% less time from a duration standpoint. What does that mean? Less time and effort, lower risk deployment, accelerated adoption, faster time to market, and competitive advantage. If you're a small and mid-sized SaaS-based company and you're wanting to deploy fast before your competitors get out there, you want to upgrade faster so you can get more capital value out of your investments in Oracle, this is a perfect scenario and tool for you, again, from a time-to-market perspective and competitive advantage. This is a systems comparison. Again, in this particular case, a customer had 4 servers and a SAN that they were going to acquire versus looking at 2 ODAs. Again, we went through all the inputs with them. And this one, you've got a lower cost savings, not dramatically so. Again, there's lots of variables on the inputs, but it emphasizes the point that, if you can get paid less, get a pre-engineered system, and deploy it faster, why would you want to take that risk? Again, certain things that doesn't always align up, but in this particular case, it did. One point I really want to emphasize on here is the long-term support costs of, OS and hardware, as well as storage. The OpEx side of that is going to be dramatically more expensive using multiple systems versus a single vendor like you would with an ODA. So this is a licensing ODA TCO sample comparison. In this case, a customer was upgrading from 10G to 11G for their data warehouse. They wanted high availability with rack, a separate production and a separate test or dev and staging system. In this case, because of ODA's on-demand licensing capacity within locking or unlocking cores to what you need, it aligned much better to their actual user count and from a performance gain. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't add additional licenses as they need more, if they need more capacity. But the point is that, within a week, they could deploy 2 systems, be ready to go. And in this particular case, it was 67% lower list licensing cost. So we're starting to wrap up here, and we're going to start Q&A here shortly. But really, the call to action here for people who are attending is 2 things. One is we wanted to educate you about ODA, the overall business benefits of it, from the simplicity, total cost of ownership. A lot of the bells and whistles features that are way more easier in an 11G environment today with ODA versus a traditional build environment. But our call to action is we'll be following up with anybody that has signed up. We will send a copy of this presentation to you, but we are offering at no cost a free TCO report studying the benefits of using ODA for any interested prospect. The time commitment is approximately 60 minutes total, 2 to 3 iterative phone calls to gather inputs. Some of those calls are 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, validating. And shortly thereafter, we can deliver and generate a TCO report 2 to 4 business days after validations are received. So what do you get with this? Well, this study shows you the business benefits for your unique situation and gives you the tools to justify and accelerate your projects. The previous 4 or 5 slides, those are sample examples of a custom TCO that we've built for their situation, for them to position with management, pull all those pieces of the puzzle together into one single document so that that can be presented to management who owns the CapEx or OpEx in the business. So, number one, you can send me an email at sales@predictivetechnologies.com, or you can call me to set up an appointment, or vice versa. We will follow up in an email as well. We've had a lot of questions during the chat, which is, how can I get a copy of the presentation? So we're going to have this on YouTube, and we'll send out that URL link to all parties who have signed up or have attended. So next, we're going to open this up for Q&A. And I am going to hand this over to Lindsay and Neil to answer the Q&A questions that have been answered or have been posed during the presentation.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Brian. I wanted to take a quick look at the questions here and kind of go through a few of them. One of the questions that came up is, could the Oracle Database Appliance be used for a 5 terabyte data warehouse? Yes, the Database Appliance can be used for that. There are a couple of options that can be done. Obviously, the storage can be added onto using NFS attached storage, but the recommended option would be within a 5 terabyte warehouse. Compression should be used, and compressing it will get it within the 4 terabyte range. It will also increase performance of warehouse operations. That would be the recommended approach for that. Second, another question came across is, let me highlight them down. Questions are coming in fast now. About migration. The question was, please describe the migration process of migrating multiple databases to Database Appliance and how much downtime. So that is the great answer. It depends. The migration itself is a standard database migration. So it depends on the current release you're on. If you're on, if you're going back to Oracle 6 or 7, or if you're on 9 or 10G release 2, traditionally what would happen is you'd have your existing environment, you'd stand up your new environment, and then the recommendation is to migrate your data across. And that will really just depend on how much data you have. The other part of the migration here is it's really recommendation. It's not as much as a migration as you are doing like an initial implementation, because if you just migrate the data across and put it on the new code set, you're really leveraging the 10G release 2 features using the 11G code and not taking advantage of all the 11G R2 has to take advantage of. So depending on the complexity of the database is what it takes to migrate it. You can have multiple databases within the Database Appliance running, so that's not a challenge. The other recommendation here with migration is to leverage Oracle's Golden Gate technology. This can help lessen that downtime if that's what's critical to you, allowing you to continue production in your existing environment until you have your new environment completely set up, tested your application on top of it, and then handle the final bit of data movement. Another question comes in is, what is the scenario for offsite redundancy? The question asks, what happens if we actually have a disaster and you have loss of a data center? So the Database Appliance is built on Oracle's 11G Release 2 technology, so that means it has complete use of Oracle's disaster recovery features, which is called Oracle Data Guard. The Database Appliance itself is highly available, but for disaster recovery, you use Data Guard, and it creates a copy of the database at a remote location. The nice thing about the Database Appliance is, since it does have the pay-as-you-grow licensing model, you can have a production environment that may be running 12 cores. And you have a disaster recovery environment that is the exact same hardware, but you've chosen to only turn on 2 cores, where now you have the Database Appliance sitting there running Data Guard. You have a live copy of your database being moved across. There are several configuration options to choose how available it is. But in the event you have a failure, now if you need that additional capacity, you're not bringing in new hardware. You can literally turn on the cores that you need to bring you back up to your production work levels. So Data Guard would be the recommended within that. Let's see here. Hold on, I'm trying to. The question on licensing: does the pay-as-you-go approach include include only the database cost? Really, the pay-as-you-grow, the hardware. When you purchase the hardware, you get all the hardware. All the cores are there. You simply choose how many to turn on. The pay-as-you-grow is specific to the licensing in the database. You simply license the database technology based on the number of cores you turn on. So you would just actually have to take the expense for the numbers you're using. If you decide to add additional licenses and turn on more CPUs and more cores, you have the ability to do that. Let's see here.
Questions are coming in a lot faster down here, Lindsay.
They are. I read the first 5. I haven't read all these yet. What would you do to scale to more than 4 terabytes of storage? Migrate it to a new custom-built server. You have a lot of, again, this is similar to the 5 terabyte. You really have several options within this. The 4 terabytes is really just the space for data storage. That's not including system table space, redo table space. We've actually already calculated for that within the environment. So this is the actual just your data set size. The advanced compression option is very good with compression. I mentioned within data warehousing. Within data warehousing, it actually improves performance because since the data blocks are compressed, when they're brought up into memory, more data is brought into memory and can be manipulated much quicker within it. You do have the option of NFS attached storage if you need to, if compression is it's more than what you need. One thing to look at is there is a compression advisor. You can look at it on your existing system within Enterprise Manager, and it will tell you if that data can be compressed and what it will come down to and what it will look like. So you can actually look at it on your existing system before you go to a database appliance. If the database appliance is not going to fit within storage and you don't want to go NFS, Oracle does offer, obviously, your traditional custom-built systems, but also within the engineer family, if you decide to move to that, we do have the Exadata platform that starts from a quarter rack all the way to 8 fully clustered boxes together. So that's another option you may want to look at as well. Can I have 2 versions of the database running? Yes, you can, except it is the you can't have 2 versions running on it, but currently it only supports 11GR2, which is the latest release, so you could have multiple dot releases on it. Be aware when we patch and migrate, it patches and migrates the database, all of them up to the latest release. So that is something that's going to occur. So you could have 2 different versions. We really recommend for simplicity to keep them all the same one. But if later on you wanted to be running 11GR2 for some applications and the next release, be it 12C, you would be able to do that. Can I migrate multiple licenses from multiple servers into one ODA box? Yes. License migration, the database appliance does not change your standard licensing. Brian with Predictive can definitely work with y'all and help you understand the best licensing scenario for you and how to deploy that. Let me see here. Going in. Is that
Here's another licensing question around the distinction between the ODA for the primary and also for DR site
yes.
solutions.
All right. How's the light? Okay. So how is it? DataGuard is a licensed is not an option, but it's really just a function of the database. So it is running and it is active on the second environment. So you would license the number of cores you have in your disaster recovery site. But since you're running a database appliance and it's really just applying, probably the recommendation would be to start with 2 cores. And then if you do have a disaster and have to move to that, those licenses that we're running in that other environment are no longer up and available. You can turn on the cores in the DR site there to accompany it. So the database appliance makes for very, very flexible and, you know, a very inexpensive way to have disaster recovery. Let's see, another question about multiple database on the server. How are individual instances optimized? When you go into the wizard and you choose, they have the different configuration options from extra small to large. You can choose the size database that you want to deploy. And if you have multiple ones within the database appliance, you can choose multiple small ones. And it chooses the memory and storage configuration appropriately. That way you can have multiple databases running within the appliance itself. Let's see here. All right. Here's a question on the storage. Does the appliance come with both standard and solid state drives? Is there an option? The box comes configured with both solid state and with traditional storage. It's 12 terabytes of traditional magnetic disk, and then it's 292 gigabytes. These are all raw numbers of solid state. And the database is already optimized for what gets laid out on which platform. Items like redo logs that are heavily write-dependent and can affect performance, those are already optimized and mirrored to the solid state drives. And the data files and such are actually on your traditional magnetic disk. One other thing that's really interesting with the technology and the automatic storage manager, within 11GR2, if you have heavily written data, the database understands the concept of a physical magnetic disk and knows that data on the outside of the disk is more faster to access. So it actually optimizes your data layout on the physical platters itself. So your most highly read and updated is actually moved to those outer platters, affecting performance, really dramatically improving that. So that's a great feature that comes automatically configured within the database appliance and is a part of the 11GR2 database. Does database appliance support grid control implementations for database monitor? Absolutely. It's pre-configured for 11GR2. It does support the new 12C management console, and we do allow the installation of third-party agents if you decide to have other environments. There's a question on Recovery Manager. The database appliance Recovery Manager, or RMAN, the database appliance is already tuned and optimized for RMAN. So if you do have a management system, you can integrate that into it and use the RMAN interface for all of your backups like a traditional Oracle database. Does the DBA still have the ability to make init.org changes? Can you get to the parameter files? Yes, you can. The database itself is still available. If there's specific tuning that you need to do or you need to do init changes, that is available, and that can be optimized after the installation is done. Those files are not locked out. We don't really recommend making OS-type tweaks and such like that, but the init files, the database is there. If you make those changes, Oracle doesn't come back and switch them back. We have just gone through and already optimized all the parameters specifically to that hardware build, but that doesn't mean that you don't have a special application that maybe needs a different change here or there, and you can do that. And let's see here.
I'm trying to
here's a question on standby on two databases. Can you have one? Basically, can you have a logical standby database on it while you have an open database? So the question is, within DataGuard, I have a production environment running on the East Coast, and I have disaster recovery running on the West. You want to run a production environment, two different production environments, but production on each, backing each other up, so that there's a disaster recovery copy of the other database on it. That is fully supported, and that can be done. Any other questions? Oh, here we go. The question is, what's the traditional hardware upgrade cycle? And the person writing the question says that we upgrade hardware on a 3-year cycle. We really, how often customers end up upgrading, 3 years seems to be the most common because that seems to be fitting with everyone's depreciation model. So that does fit well into it. You know, Oracle will, obviously, over time, as CPU clock speeds update or Intel has new chipsets, rev the hardware. But the database appliance, once it ships, that is its configuration for its life for the hardware. But if you're doing a 3-year life cycle, this is really great, especially if you're on year 2 and you know you're going to be depreciating your asset and you're already on a Linux Intel environment. This is very, very easy just to roll out into your environment, have it up there running, really with minor changes. So your shop is ready to go, and really the benefit you get is it just lowers your operating cost at that point. I think we've hit all the questions.
Yeah, so Lindsay, this is Brian Boyd. I wanted to pose another thing because a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, what's the cost and this and that, and you know, just to the list cost on the appliance itself with the 4 terabytes usable, 12 total, you know, the two servers all pre-configured and everything is $50,000 before support. And again, you can license it, you know, get support to lock it in to up to 3 years on it. So really, it is very cost effective from, you know, I mean, even if you were going to deploy, you know, a standalone, build your own system, and even if you had your own SAN system, to avoid all the, you know, other activities that have to go on with deploying the system, it almost pays for itself just from a, you know, cost perspective. So I just want to emphasize that. I get that question a lot. And again, everyone's situation is a little different, but you know, it's not like you're spending $250,000, you know, when you're talking about one of these things from an engineered perspective. The other point that in a recent engagement that we talked to a customer about, and again, we're going to wrap this up here in about 3 minutes so everybody knows, is that, you know, someone talked to me and they said, well, you know, we've got about 15, you know, siloed type applications, you and we were thinking of doing a big system, or multiple big systems, and you can. There's nothing wrong with that, and again, PTI is happy to help you out. The point, though, is that if you want to go drop 3, 4, 5 ODAs in place, you can have this stuff done in weeks, versus many months. And it's just trying to highlight that point for everyone is, time is money, time to market, competitive advantage. ODA really offers you that value proposition. Let's see here. I think, what is the hardware and OS support model? So again, it's single vendor solution from Oracle, Linux, the hardware support by Oracle, the SAN and net, the storage, as well as the Oracle database. It's all tied into Oracle support. So again, you can license it from a 1 or a 3-year option, depending if you want to lock it in short or long term for inflation perspective. So I think that's it. I wanted to say thank you to Lindsay and Neil and everyone that participated in this event. Thank you for everyone who attended. Again, to highlight, we will be sending up a follow-up email and phone call to anyone that signed up for the event. This will be made available via web or YouTube, so we'll have a YouTube URL, and we'll have that readily available so that you can pass it on to other people or have it presented to your management as well. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up.